Welcome back to part 2 of steps 8 and 9. And we looked at the general suggestions for making an amends, the conversational part of it at least, to an enemy, but it can be extrapolated to an amends for anyone. But now we're looking at the various aspects of the amends process that drive, for example, whether we make an amends or not, the exclusions to this idea of sitting down with people and what we need to consider, looking at the various specific situations that make it complex or at times feel impossible to make that amends. And it's quite an in-depth and lengthy part of the big book. In fact, more words are spent on, looking at criminal offences and whether we owe money and, marital relationships and extramarital affairs than, in the section on how to actually sit down and have the conversation. It's quite interesting. Let's look at owing money. So we pick up where we left off last time. Here's what it says about owing money, financial amends, if you like. Most alcoholics owe money. Most people owe money when you think about mortgages and so forth. But I guess we're talking about the money we might owe because of our drinking or even what happened in our recovery up until now. We do not dodge our creditors. In other words, the people we owe money to. We don't dodge them. So this is a part of the rebuilding of our life through dealing with the wreckage of our past. Telling them what we are trying to do, in other words, staying sober, but we're up to step 8 and 9, etc. We make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. And this is really interesting. That we are asked to disclose our membership of AA or at least our drinking problems. I find it's logical to disclose AA membership because it makes more sense of why we're doing an amends or looking at redressing a financially hard situation. People tend to know about the amends process, even if they just watched that episode with who was it, James Spader on Seinfeld all those years ago. There's a lot of allusions to the amends process in TV and film these days. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it may cause financial harm. So it's not about us anymore, it's about doing the right thing. Approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us, arranging the best deal we can, so we let these people know we are sorry. Arranging the best deal we can. You can't get blood from a stone. This seems to be the point. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. This is perhaps why we need to disclose some of our drinking history. Look, I've lost a lot through my drinking. I am where I am. I want to do the right thing, but I don't have a lot of money at the moment. Can we work something out? This is the suggestion here. We must lose our fear of our creditors no matter how far we have to go, for we are liable to drink if we are afraid to face them. So this is the inevitable fork in the road that rather than moving away from, we are stuck with forever. If we look away as we rebuild our life spiritually, it may lead to a drink. We must thoroughly clear away the wreckage of our past. This is the point the big book almost labours. And it goes back to, are you really alcoholic? Did you really identify completely with step 1, the allergy to alcohol? Or are you just someone who drinks heavy by choice? Sometimes we have to go all the way back to the key decisions we've already made to see the imperative to do the uncomfortable thing at steps 8 and 9. Do we really truly believe that seeking God is the only chance we have? Because if there are other options, why would you look at this really complicated, hard stuff? You know what I mean? So there's a lot to consider. Criminal offences, it goes on. Perhaps we committed a criminal offence which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. Wow. So it gets pretty heavy pretty quick, right? We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. So we go back to finances here, but with a criminal overtone. We have already admitted this in confidence to another person at step 5, but we are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offence such as padding the expense account, which, if you're not sure what that means, is letting work pay for things that it shouldn't. Most of us have done this sort of thing. So whether it's a small thing or a big thing, if it's criminal, what's the answer? Well, from here, the big book moves on to discussing divorce rather than staying put and suggesting what we do about crimes we have committed. These suggestions come a bit later, actually after the divorce bit. But back then, divorce was a little bit different in the way it played out in the courts. At least from an Australian perspective, it feels different. Maybe we are divorced and have remarried but haven't kept up the alimony to number one. She, he or they are indignant about it and has a warrant out for our arrest. I guess that's the bit that may not happen everywhere in the world these days. That's a common form of trouble too. Of course, the idea of not paying our debts from a previous marriage or other kind of relationship, that's the current contemporary bit we need to carry forward. So where's the suggestion? Here it is. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. So this is an important part of the amends process. What are these general principles? Beyond the conversation and saying, we want to express regret itself, what actions do we take moving forward to make amends? Reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. Here we go, once again, reminding the reader, you took step 3 and you've moved on from it. We ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. And so, when we ask that, I find the step 7 prayer perhaps is a good one to state here. God, what would you have me do, for you and others after removing my character defects? We may lose our position or reputation or face jail. Ouch, they are big consequences, right? But we are willing. And this is the thing. We are willing to face those rather difficult consequences if we're fair dinkum about this spiritual journey. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. Now, whether you or I agree with that, this is what the big book is actually saying. And it's interesting, the idea of whether I'm going to jail or not, or whether I face reputational ruin or not, whether I'm going to lose my job or not, I'm willing for those consequences because I'm so committed to actually clearing away the wreckage of my past, the things that I've actually done in the past that have harmed others. It's the willingness that seems to be the focus here. But what's the right thing? It may or may not be the most obvious thing. Being willing to fess up and endure the consequences is one thing. Doing so is another. So this is an interesting turn of phrase. We ask God, obviously, give me strength and direction to do the right thing. And if we're being bloody-minded or simplistic about this step, we might go, well, it is to go to jail. It is to lose our reputation. But that is not the case. The reason why this is a complex section of the big book is it actually starts to challenge this idea. Well, not challenge it, but the idea of going to jail. But do you have to? Would that be the right thing? How do we know what the right or wrong thing is? This is the part that really is a challenge for many of us, including me, obviously, in AA. What's the right thing? It moves on. Usually, however, people are involved. Okay, so people in the present day are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save him, her, or themselves from the alcoholic pit. In other words, to make life worse for others in making our amends. We are not to be that person who just goes, oh, let me go to jail because I feel I need to. That almost sounds like guilt, which is a character defect, right? I feel terrible. I'm a terrible person. Put me to jail. Well, apparently, the issue is, what if that lets people down in the present? That seems to be the point being made here. Let's find that out. A man we know had remarried because of resentment and drinking. It's nice that resentment and drinking. He had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to the court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life. Note, it's not called a program, it's called a way of life here. Had secured a position and was getting his head above water, doing all the right things. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, here I am, put me in jail. We thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary, but if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. The families that existed in the present day. We suggested he write his first wife admitting his faults. In other words, what was the outcome of step 4 resentments inventory? I was self-centered, I was lustful, I was this, I was that. Our faults, shortcomings, defects of character, whatever we call them, and asking forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. Nice touch. He told her what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course she did not, and the whole situation has long since been adjusted. This is why, and I'll say this more than once in this video, step 8 and step 9 are introduced together and they run together as a combo deal. Okay, because without the willingness to do these things, which do feel and sound extreme, we're not in a position to offer these things when they're probably not going to be acted upon when there are other options. What's interesting in this story is by saying I'm willing to face the consequences, it actually seems to have alleviated the need for those consequences to actually happen, perhaps in the wife's mind. So we make amends for yesterday by considering how we help others best today. And this seems to be the meta system that we use to assist us in making judgments as to what we need to do today to help others. Because I can't help others 2 years ago. There's no such thing as a time machine. I can only make up for what I did 2 years ago today, but I have to be helpful today. So how I make amends for yesterday, I need to consider how I help others best today. Let's look for more evidence of that. It goes on, before taking drastic action, which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. So in other words, if I'm going to bring someone else down with me when I clear away the wreckage of my past, and that may involve my criminality or exposing the person I had the affair with, I need them to be involved and to say that's fine. Well, that's the first suggestion. And I'm sure a lot of situations have been knocked out as a result of this suggestion. Others may not be very keen on you doing that. It would be considered a harm, I suppose. Okay. We need their consent. If we have obtained permission, if they go, okay, totally get it, on board, have consulted with others, ask God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, in other words, we need to take the drastic step, we must not shrink. So we need to follow through. Otherwise, we'll drink. This is the suggestion. It's what the big book's actually saying. Domestic troubles. The chances are that we have domestic troubles. Perhaps we are mixed up with women, men, people in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. A great turn of phrase. So timeless. Perhaps the most timeless sentence in the big book. Yeah, I can identify with that in 2022. The book then spends half a page or so exploring examples of this in more detail, all the things that we might do that we don't want advertised. But the upshot, however, is whether, or whatever I should say, the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are sure our wife, husband, partner, spouse, etc. does not know, this is about a dalliance, should we tell her, him, them? This is what the big book says. Not always, we think. So that's a curious thing to ponder. So our job isn't to necessarily just fess up and boldly say everything. It seems a bit self-indulgent to me at times to do that. We have to consider others. That's how we stay sober. It continues. If he, she, they knows in a general way that we have been wild, should we tell in detail? Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. There's step 4 again, admitting fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars, so they may push. And then we pick it up a few sentences later. We feel we ought to say to her, him, them, that we have no right to involve another person, this third party. We are sorry for what we have done, and God willing, it shall not be repeated. And that goes to, in this case, where we're talking about affairs and so on, the sex ideal we worked on at step 4. That's where this the desire for it not to be repeated, this is where we need our sex ideal. We can even explain that if we wish to and say, well, look, I've come up with this sex ideal. It involves, could be monogamy, for example, and being faithful. That may be what they're suggesting here. Anyway, more than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, very AA of them, we have often found this the best course to take. So we have to put that line in the sand. I know you want to know, but that's not going to help that person. This is on me. It's what I did. We're the couple. I am truly sorry. I'll do whatever I can for it not to happen again, God willing, but that's as far as it goes. It's a really solid suggestion for how the amends process works in that situation. And it goes, I guess, back to the conversation we need to have and what we share and what we don't share. All right, utmost frankness. It moves on to perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. Okay, it's interesting. Does that include our sponsor? I don't know. It may be that both will decide the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. So at times when we do have to be utmost, and with our frankness, at times it seems to be suggesting in the big book that by being so, it may mean that we just have to let it go. It moves on. Keep it always in sight that we are dealing with the most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk face-to-face combat. And that's an interesting turn of phrase. It means that we don't just have to go for the jugular and be that, I'm using air quotes, brave person who fesses everything up, and it may cause more turmoil. It may harm people in the present day, and we've actually, put ourselves in a position to not be harmful to others. So this is where, and I've said this before, we make amends for yesterday by considering how we help others best today. It's a very good system for tapping into our way of life. The spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. So the big book then moves away from this very specific situational analysis of how amends might work, and it starts to talk about the responsibility we have to live spiritually. And it's a good time to talk about it because we are talking about some pretty hideous consequences for past actions here. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he, she, or they need to do is keep sober. I wish I could capture all of them, but there's a lot. I've caught these ones. Certainly he or she, they must keep sober, for there will be no home if he or she doesn't. So they need to stay sober. Because I've heard this in meetings, by the way. Oh, look, me staying sober is my amends. I've heard many people share that. If you go to a STEPS meeting, Steps 8 and 9, I've heard it so often said, yeah, look, me being sober for my family, that's my amends. This is what the big book has to say about that. But he, she is a long way from making good to the people whom for years he, she has so shockingly treated. So there's a suggestion here. Staying sober is not an amends in itself? It moves on. The alcoholic, in other words, when we're still out there drinking, I suspect, predominantly, is like a tornado roaring his or her way through the lives of others. I mean, it could be in our recovery up until this point too, but, obviously the life we're, subscribing to is very much based on not doing this. Hearts are broken. By the way, this is another great section that explores the unmanageability of alcoholism in full flight. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his or her way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken. Sweet relationships are dead. Affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. So we have a lot to make up for once we stop drinking and start this recovery path. Just staying sober? So staying sober is not an amends in itself. This is the point the big book is making. Yes, there is a long period, it continues, of reconstruction ahead. We, recovering alcoholics, must take the lead of this reconstruction. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyse the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticise them. Now, that sounds like an amends conversation to me. Let's just look at this. The book is literally saying that with our family, we've got to sit down and frankly analyse the past with them as we now see it, being very careful not to criticise. So there's a clear indication we need to make that formal verbal amends. Obviously, staying sober is important too. So staying sober is not amends in itself. Okay, this is being, clearly outlined here. We have to have that conversation. And what's interesting is that turn of phrase. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyse the past as we now see it. And I've found this again and again with amends, and not just family, with work colleagues, friends. It becomes a two-way unpacking of what happened back then. And the other person usually wants to have their say, and that's fine. I'm happy to listen and without criticism. And it's lovely to get to that point of, okay, wow, we're on the same page here. Now I've done this inventory. I now see what you saw and still see, which was I was selfish. I was selfish. Sometimes when I make the amends, that person will actually unpack a few more defects of character that me and my sponsor have missed. and this is one of the reasons why it's such a wonderful, humbling process. And like any good conversation, it ends up, I always see it as two people sitting side by side. And I actually try and make amends side by side rather than facing people, because I think it's a better way to have that conversation, a bit more spiritual. Okay. The book continues, wrongs we can never fully right. There may be some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Again, steps 8 and 9 coming together. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an anonymous letter or email these days. I don't know. We'll never know what Bill Wilson and the other founders, what Hank P. and Bob Smith felt about emailing as opposed to letters. Pray about that one, I suppose, and there may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble. And these are also great words to add to our manner list from the first video of Calm, Open, and Frank. Calm, open, frank, sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble. So we need to be those things without being servile or scraping. And I always take that to mean, this is my personal view, like we were when we made drunk apologies. Now, I've heard some members take that we are not servile and scraping it and kind of spin it a bit away from it just being about how we approach people making a difficult amends, going to them and being all servile and scrape. It's a very specific situation or context we're given. It's up to us, whatever we do with these suggestions, but this seems very related to the amends process itself and the paragraph within that sentence where it sits. But it's an interesting one. We've got to stop being that drunk person, guilt-riddenly apologising, and find a more profound way to say, I've done some self-reflection and I want to express regret for, what I did, even though it can never fully right what happened. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And again, what we see at that point, I feel, in this part of the big book, this happens just before the promises. I won't go through the promises, just do a meeting tonight. You'll probably hear them. But, it's all about being willing to make amends if the chance happens. The amends itself, if we're willing, is obviously challenging, from it being a difficult conversation all the way through to being paying people back, working out a way to do that, or even facing criminal action. Who wants to do that? But this is the life that we've agreed to explore. And I'm yet to hear a single person say, "Oh, I went to jail because of my amends." It's interesting how in real life this plays out. This idea of going back a few slides, asking God, "What's the right thing to do here? How do I not harm others today in the way I do an amends?" You know, there's usually a solution that God will reveal that my limited thinking literally can't. And it's a marvelous thing to explore with an open heart and mind. And on that hopefully positive note, have a happy sober day. See you for step 10.